How Trump plans to take on censors, and they plan to take on Trump. From the Gateway Pundit, this story was originally published by Real Clear Wire by Ben Weingarten. I had this article up on my live stream, and I decided to read it separately because it's so long and it deserves its own video. The incoming Trump administration scored an early but possibly illusory victory last month when its efforts to reform government overreach, when it successfully pressured Congress to eliminate what it termed sweetheart provisions for government censors from a measure to stave off a government shutdown. Funding for the State Department's Global Engagement Center, which Republicans had attacked as a tool of domestic censorship, was stripped from the final bill, and the center announced that it was closed for good on December 23rd. Days later, however, reporting emerged that the State Department had devised plans to shift the center's 51 employees and millions of dollars of funding to a separate hub, purportedly to counter foreign information, manipulation, and interference. So it's a shell game. President-elect Trump has not said how he will respond to this maneuver, but in extensive public comments, he has said that targeting what critics have called the censorship industrial complex will be a high priority in his new administration. Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg's pledge to restore free expression on his platforms and join the Trump administration in its efforts to push back on global censorship 2 weeks before Inauguration Day indicates speech policing forces like his may be disarming accordingly. We know this is bullshit because on his own platforms, on Facebook and Instagram and others, he is blocking links to competitors to Facebook, Instagram, what have you. This was covered in another article on Cointelegraph. As the State Department's move suggests, however, this push will likely face stiff resistance. There will be a visceral reaction from the bureaucratic state in permanent Washington. Senator Eric Schmidt told Real Clear Investigations. As Attorney General of Missouri, Schmidt launched the Missouri versus Biden lawsuit against federal government collusion with social media companies and nonprofits to target disfavored speech. Trump outlined the steps he might pursue in his December 2022 video detailing his free speech policy initiative, a video that, ironically, received less attention originally because YouTube had banned the former president. Responding to what he called a sinister group of deep state bureaucrats, Silicon Valley tyrants, left-wing activists, and depraved corporate news media that have conspired to manipulate and silence the American people, and collaborated to suppress vital information on everything from elections to public health, Trump vowed to dismantle and destroy the censorship cartel, including through the use of vigorous executive action starting within hours of his inauguration. So what this amounts to is a collusion between government and corporations, which, if you follow the Conservative Treehouse blog, big tech cannot exist without government supporting it. Conservative Treehouse, they used to call Twitter Jack's Coffee Shop. Jack Dorsey, founder of Twitter. The resources required the data centers required to operate these huge websites are so expensive that it's really not, there's no way to profit from them unless they have either unlimited investor capital or assistance from a major body like a national government. You look at TikTok, you wonder how TikTok has managed to succeed where other similar apps like Vine have failed. TikTok is a Chinese app, therefore it is backed, it's a proxy, it's an extension of the CCP, the Communist government of China. So TikTok has all that Chinese government money. And that's why there's a whole fracas over banning TikTok, because it's an intelligence gathering app for a foreign enemy. Likewise, big tech in the US, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, these are intelligence gathering operations for America's intelligence services, for the CIA, FBI. NSA, maybe, we can talk about Edward Snowden sometime and how he might be a plant. But let's continue. According to the Free Speech Policy Initiative, Trump's administration's efforts will include A first state executive order barring federal authorities from colluding with others to abridge Americans' protected speech, preventing federal dollars from being used to classify domestic speech as mis or disinformation, and from being lavished on nonprofits and academic institutions engaging in similar efforts, including flagging posts to social media platforms for suppression. Yeah, so these nonprofits and academics and NGOs, they also act as proxies for the government. The government cannot censor us directly, so they use nonprofits, schools, and corporations to do it for them. We see corporations and nonprofits and schools as proxies for a lot of other violations of the Bill of Rights as well, such as COVID injection mandates. All right. Identifying and firing bureaucrats across the federal government who have engaged in direct or indirect censorship while enacting laws imposing criminal penalties on such conduct. Directing the Department of Justice to probe participants in the new online censorship regime for myriad potential violations of law. Working with Congress to pass legislation modifying Section 230 of the Communications Act to extend its liability shield only to those large online platforms meeting high standards of neutrality, transparency, fairness, and non-discrimination, and helping to pass a digital Bill of Rights, including a right to due process requiring government officials to obtain a court order to remove online content. So, have you ever tried appealing a decision by YouTube or Google? Hey, they banned you from advertising on the platform or making money, and you try to appeal the decision and you hit a brick wall. You hit really a robot who doesn't even understand reasoning with you. That's because these big tech platforms, they don't have the same framework as the United States, as the government under the United States Constitution. They don't respect your human rights. A sprawling network. As Real Clear Investigations has reported extensively, a sprawling network of government agencies and connected NGOs have formed a whole of society partnership aimed at combating what its constituents consider dangerous misinformation, dis, and malinformation, particularly on social media. And dis, and malinformation is code word for information they don't like. They're using a phrase that was used by the Soviet communists, disinformation. It was a practice of propaganda and lying to the West, and they're using it in under a different definition. Players include counter disinformation research centers at leading universities and think tanks, fact checkers, and news rating entities, and like-minded for-profits, often funded and or promoted by government agencies and powerful foundations. Many of these initiatives began in response to perceived threats from abroad. The Global Engagement Center, for example, was created during the Obama administration to combat foreign propaganda and information operations, originally with a focus on terrorist groups. It soon expanded its mission to combat alleged threats in the homeland, using taxpayer dollars to coordinate with counter-disinformation entities that have worked to purge disfavored domestic news and views, including through targeting the business models of U.S. outlets like Real Clear Politics and many others. That is rich coming from the Obama administration, knowing that Obama presided over the Arab Spring. Like, people in Egypt were naming their kids Facebook because of the propaganda, poured out on there, and how they were able to topple governments. The Arab Spring was a prime example of a color revolution. We don't have time to cover color revolutions in this video, but that might be worth a video of its own. Mike Benz of the Foundation for Freedom Online asserts that support for such efforts spans 12 different government departments and 50 different government programs, some of which fund related programs at nearly 100 universities under the banner of disinformation studies and related disciplines. So they're teaching young adults to be disinformation watchdogs, probably feeding them the government line. How useful is this? Well, it's useful if you want to get a government job, but probably not in the private sector. Transparency-focused nonprofit Open the Books calculates that the Biden administration has granted roughly $260 million in awards pertaining to misinformation. President Biden's national strategy for countering domestic terrorism codified such efforts. It directed federal authorities to work with state, local, tribal, and territorial governments and civil society, the private sector, academia, and local communities, as well as with our allies and foreign partners to address the extreme polarization fueled by a crisis of disinformation and misinformation, often channeled through social media platforms, which can tear Americans apart and lead some to violence. Well, like Thomas Matthew Crooks, the Pope himself blamed Trump's assassination attempt on misinformation, on fake news. So, it seems to me the Democrat regime is projecting, don't you think? The trial judge in Missouri versus Biden, which would ultimately land at the Supreme Court as Murphy versus Missouri, found that this public-private partnership, kicked off with agencies like the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA for short, towards the end of the first Trump administration, engaged in perhaps the most massive attack against free speech in United States history in its efforts to suppress disfavored speech, particularly on election integrity and the COVID-19 pandemic. Litigation and congressional oversight have expressed the breadth and depth of these activities. Some counter-disinformation entities have, facing public scrutiny, curtailed their work, but the Supreme Court never ruled on the merits of Murphy, finding that the plaintiffs lacked standing, and thereby did not establish that the government efforts, direct and indirect, to press social media companies to suppress protected speech are illegal or unconstitutional. So apparently the plaintiff didn't have the right standing or right kind of complaint for the Supreme Court to look at this. Says the Supreme Court under John Roberts. Take that as you will. Nor has a divided Congress passed bills prohibiting such activities, defunding them, or penalizing federal officials who might engage in them. Government-supported nonprofits, often portraying themselves as researchers, including the University of Washington Center for an Informed Public, have vowed to continue their work, which they say is pivotal to defending democracy. The left always says democracy. We have to defend our democracy. Democracy is another code word. It's a euphemism for something else. You ever see gangster movies and they call their extortion racket a protection racket? Pay our protection money and we won't wreck your store. That's what democracy is. Democracy is code word for the New World Order, the Illuminati, the criminal cabal, the World Economic Forum, whatever you want to call the mass of globalist empire. That's what they mean by democracy. Some people say democracy is a euphemism for bureaucracy. That too. So many words used by the cabal members are not what the dictionary says they are. A spokesperson for the center told Real Clear Investigations that in the face of a threatened reckoning, the personnel are continuing their work to study how rumors and falsehoods spread online, understand the role of social media platforms and generative AI in shaping those information flows, and to educate people about online manipulation, deception, and scams. Well, if they're so concerned about falsehoods, they have nothing to worry about, right? Trump and his many of his personnel picks, so far see these initiatives and collaborations differently. His nominee to chair the Federal Communications Commission, Brendan Carr, has said one of his top priorities is to smash the censorship cartel. Under Section 230 of the Communications Act, which falls under the FCC's purview, social media platforms have been deemed immune from civil liability for taking down certain types of content in good faith. Carr recently argued that this provision has been used to silence divergent speech and indicated that under his leadership, the commission may look at implementing that in a way that can promote more speech. He has also suggested that given that a cohort of advertising and marketing agencies have been working together to collude to crack down on free speech, this might constitute unlawful anti-competitive behavior for his agency to consider. So, yeah, advertising marketing. Some of you might remember the YouTube ad apocalypse and how it was a pretense to demonetize a whole lot of YouTube videos and creators. That was because supposedly a lot of corporate advertisers, like big name corporations who spend a lot of money on ads, they wanted to pull their money. So YouTube started saying, hey, we don't, a lot of corporations didn't want their ads to go on videos that they didn't approve of. So YouTube decided, oh, this ad might be monetized, but the video creator will not get a cut of revenue. So a lot of creators were either lost their income and couldn't dedicate as much time as they wanted to their craft, or they had to search for outside sources of revenue, like Patreon or affiliate marketing or outside sponsorships. Advertising is a powerful tool of censorship. That's why on television, that's why network television is censored, but movies at the theater are not. On television, which is open to like everyone, families, advertisers pay for television directly through commercials. Therefore, they have a say in what kind of content goes on there. Movies at the theater are able to slide on that because they make their money directly through ticket sales. Trump's pick to lead the Federal Trade Commission, Andrew Ferguson, called last month for a range of investigative and enforcement actions to bust up anti-competitive cartels that facilitate and promote censorship. Carr and Ferguson alike have both cited NewsGuard as a key player in online censorship. As Real Clear Investigations has reported previously, NewsGuard rates the trustworthiness of websites on a 0 to 100 scale based on their staffers' review of samples of work according to certain criteria. Those subjective ratings attach to sites when one searches them in a browser equipped with NewsGuard's extension. What's more, under the banner of brand safety, NewsGuard licenses exclusion lists of low-rated sources to advertisers to instruct their ad agencies and ad tech partners to keep their programmatic ads off those sites, starving them of pivotal ad revenue. You see this a lot with some of the other missing link media, like BuzzFeed and Huffington Post, some of the left-wing news websites that are struggling so horribly. That's because very few people are actually reading them, other than the totally demented cranks on the far left, who are not real liberals. They're far leftists who have some sort of like personality disorder preventing them from being reasonable. A lot of conservative news websites, like the Gateway Pundit, like the Daily Caller, maybe like the Daily Wire. I don't know about them. They're able to generate enough income because they have a big enough audience, because they've earned their audience the trust of their viewers. Or was I? Okay, evidence suggests NewsGuard favors conservative and independent-leaning outlets. Congressional scrutiny and reportage have revealed that NewsGuard has been a recipient of funding from both the defunct Global Engagement Center and the Department of Defense, though it disputes this characterization. So, conservative outlets may not get good advertising revenue, but they probably do have sponsors, and they have probably direct supporters and donations and their own lines of merchandise. In November, prior to his appointment as FCC commissioner, Carr sent a letter to Alphabet, Apple, Meta, and Microsoft soliciting information regarding the big tech companies' ties to NewsGuard, citing its reported biases and noting the for-profit's partnerships with web browsers and social media companies. Carr suggested that should the firms be relying on NewsGuard's offerings, such activities might violate the good faith standard upon which their Section 230 immunity shield relies. I think what Section 230 amounts to is a website, a platform, or a publisher. News websites like the Gateway Pundit or BuzzFeed or Huffington Post or Zero Hedge, they are publishers. The people that operate those websites create the content. Social media and video platforms like YouTube or Facebook or Twitter or X or Truth Social, they are platforms. Users employees themselves might use their these platforms to post their own content, but they do it on their own time. Or in Elon's case, he's the owner of X now, so he can do whatever he wants. However, these platforms should not be held liable for what should not be held liable for what users post on their platforms. NewsGuard has challenged Carr's premises. In a statement, co-CEO Gordon Kravitz, formerly the publisher of the Wall Street Journal, said that the incoming SEC commissioner's letter relied on unreliable sources, maintaining that we provide users with apolitical reliability analysis and otherwise challenged claims of bias and censoriousness. After Kravitz and co-founder and CEO Stephen Brill, a lawyer, journalist, and entrepreneur, penned a subsequent rejoinder to Carr, Brill would write in Politico that I feel like taking a shower after trying to defend my journalism to a threatening regulator, pleading with him to believe that I'm a liar, that I'm fair. Okay, this is emotional manipulation and histrionics. So get a grip, dude. In response to a question regarding NewsGuard's view of the Trump administration's coming efforts, General Manager Mike Skibinski reiterated the arguments in NewsGuard's responses to Carr, telling Real Clear Investigations, we agree that the government should not engage in censorship and that social media companies should be more transparent. We founded NewsGuard to be as the apolitical, fully transparent alternative to either government censorship and or social media secretly rating news sources and their claims. Well, if you're transparent, then let people look at your code. Let people look at your accounting books, your expenditures. Follow the money, as they say. Other Trump administration officials likewise seem poised to help the president implement the free speech policy initiative. The Office of Management and Budget is likely to be a key hub for such activity. It has broad powers to help the president implement its policies, including its oversight of executive agencies, clearing of executive orders, review of regulations, and developing the president's budget. Office of Management and Budget. Of course, they control the money in the government, in the government, at least in the executive branch. So it's only logical that they have that power. President's nominee for deputy director of the agency, departing North Carolina Republican Representative Dan Bishop, wrote this month that the days of the censorship industrial complex are numbered. Others who have expressed aversion to social media company efforts to target disfavored speech include Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, who will be working hand in hand with the Office of Management and Budget to the soon-to-be-created Department of Government Efficiency, and AR SAR David Sachs. Two additional picks have found themselves targeted by social media companies for censorship. Health and Human Services Secretary-designate Robert Kennedy Jr. and National Institutes of Health Director-designate Jay Bhattacharya. Fighting back, they are both plaintiffs in cases against federal agencies. Gotta take a sip quick so I don't start sounding like Robert Kennedy Jr. Foundation for Freedom Online founder Benz warned in a recent interview on the Joe Rogan podcast that the White House is going to run into a lot of headwinds given the size, scope, and scale of the censorship industry. Benz, who worked in cyber policy during President Trump's first term, suggested the resistance would come from the State Department, where he served, and the Defense Department. These agencies, he's asserted, will claim that they must maintain counter-disinformation capacities to combat foreign threats. Capacities that critics may have been trained instead on Americans. Yeah, what was originally used for foreign enemies has now been subverted and perverted into tools against American citizens. Trump is going to run into every single regional desk at the State Department, every single equity at the Pentagon, arguing that if you do not allow us to continue the censorship work, it will undermine national security. You're going to have the State Department argue that if we don't have this counter misinformation capacity, then extremists will win elections around the world, or populists will win the election around the world, and that will undermine the power of our democratic institutions, Ben told Rogan. Whether and to what extent Congress will seek to codify the president's efforts in legislation remains an open question. House Republicans in the last Congress sought to advance legislation to prohibit federal funds from directly or indirectly being used to target Americans' protected speech, punish federal officials who would collude with third parties or social media companies to censor speech, and prohibit foreign officials targeting American speech from traveling to America. Those efforts languished because either the Democrats had enough votes to block it, or Republicans in the majority joined forces with the Democrats and proved that there is a unified party. It's all kayfabe. It's all wrestling. It's all Globetrotters versus generals. Speaker Mike Johnson, in a statement upon passage of the 2025 National Defense Authorization Act, touted leadership's efforts to prohibit contracts with advertising firms that blacklist conservative news sources like NewsGuard Technologies, Inc. That the Global Engagement Center's extension made it into the original December stopgap spending bill suggested otherwise. Johnson's office has defended its inclusion by noting that the Speaker had killed multiple efforts to pass a 5-year reauthorization of the GEC during the past year. It added that the original measure ensured that the incoming administration would have the maximum ability and authority to determine how to handle the office, authorities, and funding. Neither House nor Senate leaders, Republican nor Democrat, responded to Real Clear Investigation's questions in connection with the story. Senator Rand Paul, the son of Ron Paul, the new chair of the Senate Homeland Security Committee, has indicated he would like to end the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Reports suggest he is likely to face bipartisan resistance. Acknowledging the termination is unlikely, or at the very least, he has said he would like to eliminate their ability to censor content online. Last Congress, Senator Paul introduced the Free Speech Protection Act, which would bar federal employees from directing social media platforms to censor protected speech. That legislation sat dormant. Senator Schmidt, a co-sponsor of the bill, recently introduced legislation in the Transparency in Communications Act, which would force inspectors general tasked with overseeing the federal bureaucracy to provide a comprehensive reporting of all communications on content moderation, user content, and companies' algorithms between federal agencies and big tech companies. Asked whether he anticipated there might be a bipartisan resistance to legislative remedies to purported public-private censorship efforts, given, for example, some Republicans' support of extending the life of the Global Engagement Center, Senator Schmidt replied, "I would hope not." That paragraph was not well written. "I think it's wrong to think of this as a Democrat versus Republican thing," Schmidt said. "I've been saying this from the beginning. Coercive censorship like what we witnessed by the Biden administration should scare the hell out of every American, regardless of political affiliation. We will need legitimate buy-in from all Republicans to dismantle this vast censorship enterprise built by Joe Biden and the administrative state." Yeah, this should not be a liberal versus conservative issue, because real liberals and real conservatives would agree on the importance of free speech. What we're dealing with here is party identity as part of your personal identity, as Reedsfist has pointed out during the LA fires. Reports suggest that those in the counter-disinformation effort are spooked by the Trump administration's policies. RCI reached out to notable players in connection with the story with inquiries regarding their perspectives on the Trump administration's free speech policy initiative, its likely impacts, and how they and their peers intend to respond to it. NewsGuard's Skabinski disputed the suggestion that it was part of any ecosystem, adding, "We plan simply to continue our apolitical work." The Global Disinformation Index, like NewsGuard, has tended to rank conservative independent outlets as risky spreaders of mis and disinformation and provided exclusion lists to ad tech companies and others with the intent of drying up those outlets' funding. It too has received government funding. The British-based nonprofit did not respond to RCI's inquiries. It has received U.S. government funding, and it's a British organization. Interesting. Nina Jankowicz, remember her, who is to lead the Biden administration's Disinformation Governance Board, scrapped under criticism that it was to represent an Orwellian Ministry of Truth, co-wrote an October piece asserting that amid congressional scrutiny of counter-disinformation initiatives, regardless of the outcome of the November election, there's a clear and present danger facing anyone seeking to make the internet a safer place, both inside and outside U.S. borders. Jankowicz now heads the American Sunlight Project, a 501c4 nonprofit that exists to increase the cost of lies that undermine our democracy. There's that word again. It did not respond to RCI's inquiries. nor to the Center of Democracy and Technology, a prominent proponent of counter-disinformation initiatives. Now, here's where we're facing the bureaucracy here. Irrespective of what happens at the federal level, critics fear that foreign and state authorities may fill the vacuum. As RCI previously reported, evidence suggests that global legal and regulatory standards may serve as a backdoor method to suppress protected speech at home. Hello, Five Eyes. You hear about them? I talked about them in my last live stream. Five Eyes, the countries of USA, Great Britain, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. They all work together to share intel with each other. And you might think, oh, that's swell. All of our allies working together. Nah, it's a pretense for foreign intelligence to spy on us and then share that intelligence with the US government. That's another violation of Americans' rights under the Constitution by proxy. Citing efforts from Europe to Latin America and China to pressure American social media platforms to censor, Meta Zuckerberg said in his January 7th announcement of coming free speech-focused reforms that we're going to work with President Trump to push back on governments around the world. Benz and others have warned that states may seek to pass laws abridging protected American speech on social media as a way to bypass federal resistance. Elon Musk and X filed suit against California's AB 2655, which proponents describe as flagship anti-disinformation law. According to a summary of the law, large online platforms should be required to block the posting of materially deceptive content related to elections in California and label certain additional content inauthentic, fake, or false during periods around elections. You don't fight falsehoods by censorship. You fight falsehoods by truth and evidence. Musk and X contended in their suit that the Defending Democracy from Deepfake Protection Act of 2024 would result in the censorship of wide swaths of valuable political speech and commentary that will limit the type of uninhibited, robust, wide-open debate and public issues that core First Amendment protections are designed to ensure. The answer to deepfakes, AI, and fake images generated by AI and computer, CGI, what have you, the answer to that is being able to look at the metadata. What is metadata? It's data about any media that you see online. If a platform is not willing to make metadata available, then you should, in good faith, then you should be able to dismiss it as fake news. If the creators of those deepfakes are not willing to share their metadata in good faith, you don't have to believe it. You can just treat it as funny memes or parody or entertainment. Where was I? Okay, a similar bill is working its way through Michigan's legislature. A federal judge has for now halted a parallel California law, AB 2839, prohibiting the distribution of deceptive content pertaining to candidates around elections on the ground that may violate the First Amendment. Meanwhile, maneuvering the State Department to mitigate the effects of the GEC's closure by reassigning its employees to engage in similar work indicates the resistance the Trump administration is likely to face. In response to the news, Senator Schmidt posted on X, Biden and the Dems are continuing to push to censor American voices even in Biden's final hours. Less than 20 days until Trump comes and roots out this madness. So, what this amounts to is a big tangle of bureaucracy, corporate collusion, and outright deception. A lot of this is tied to money and our ability to track money. So, what's the answer? A lot of this is funded by the financial system, the private Western Central Bank, as X22 report calls it. Both corporations and the government are both proxies of the banking system that was foisted on us in 1913, the Federal Reserve. Now, what we need to do we need to press our advantage on whatever free speech platforms we can until we have a more permanent blockchain-based platform like Odyssey or Minds. I mean, those platforms are pretty small. They're not viable yet, but they need to be. Blockchain is the technology on which cryptocurrency runs. A blockchain app or blockchain currency or token is not controlled by a single person or organization. It runs on devices all around the world and is governed by the owners of those devices. So that way, there can be transparency. There can be voting power by the stakeholders, the real stakeholders, which are the owners, not necessarily the workers or the employees, the owners, and enforce transparency that way. So, and we also need to be able to prove a lot of these senators and representatives and so-called presidents aren't really senators, representatives, and presidents that established all this bureaucracy, because fraud vitiates everything. So, I'll leave it at that. Thanks for making this long. If you like this content, if you find it valuable, please give it a like, share it, and subscribe on whatever platform you're watching this on. I'm Nate Hausman. I'm going to let you go, and I want to let you know it's okay to stand up for yourself. Over and out.